Well, hey everybody, and welcome back to Bottomless Coffee with Jerome. On this show, we have great conversations that leave us feeling inspired and empowered to make the world around us just a little bit better. Now, we're going to get creative today. We are speaking with Joey Gotchnik about poetry. Joey just finished his first book of poetry called Great Things Begin in March. And we're going to explore poetry as an outlet for creativity and healing. Well, welcome, Joey. How are you?
Thank you, Jerome. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm doing wonderful.
It's a real pleasure. And I think people really want to know, like, as a full-time poet, what must your life be like? Or is that not where you are professionally?
I wish I could say that. I'm not a full-time poet.
I don't even know a full-time poet. Is it possible to be?
Is that a title you can get? I wish, or I hope. And so side outlet, I guess, is what poetry is for me. I do have a day job, for better or for worse, at Medtronic. Great place to work. Yeah. I work in sustainability there as a materials engineer.
Cool.
And then try and balance out, hard sciences and math with a little creativity. And so poetry works in well there.
So this is kind of a way for you to use both sides of your brain.
Exactly, right? Trying to be balanced out. You don't want to tip over one way or the other.
Yes, agreed. Now, is that how, poetry started for you? Has it always been about finding balance, or, what are your earliest thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I think my earliest thoughts of poetry was just hated it. Thought it was...
Oh, you're kidding.
So frustrating, it takes so much participation and effort, I feel like, than other forms of writing, especially with my earliest experiences in high school. You're reading classic poetry that's really dense and
sure,
and hard to access sometimes.
It's inaccessible
as a young teen.
Sure.
But then kind of growing up and reading more and learning more English and language became a good balance to what I was saying before, like math and science. And then when I went to college, it was an engineering school first semester. It was very tough, and I was like, there's something missing here, and realized I wasn't reading, wasn't writing, and so chose to do a minor in creative writing, and at that time was getting into more songwriting and whatnot, and so kind of focused on poetry in the creative writing minor, and the rest is history. Really understood there, poetry can be cool, it can be funny, it can be really interesting, and especially for a 18-year-old kid from northern Minnesota, I was like, wow, I can access this, with more contemporary poetry, and that's kind of really when it started taking off for me.
So, first off, I should say the poems are really good.
Thank you.
Certainly accessible from the layperson like myself. I read them and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I really like them. I want more of them, please. But when you are speaking on your early experience in the high school level where the poetry seems inaccessible to you, and also on songwriting, what did you intentionally, when you're writing your poems, or you're like, okay, would younger Joey be able to follow this poem? Or is this something that someone could sing to? How does that work in your brain?
Definitely, yeah. I would hope so. I think my poetry reads a little more like prose, so it's a little more accessible, less dense than maybe some of the more classic poets, Keats and Robert Frost and stuff. So, which is kind of in line with a lot of my inspiration from other poets who I really enjoy. Is more accessible. Anybody should be able to take something from it or be able to put themselves in that particular situation and setting. And
Well, you write, or from what I was reading, you draw a lot of inspiration from sustainability. And I feel very comfortable saying that because you just mentioned that you have a job in sustainability. And so I'm like, okay, this is probably there on purpose.
Right. Can't escape it. Yeah. I mean, growing up in northern Minnesota, I spent a lot of time with nature, around nature, and it shows up pretty much every time in my writing, which I enjoy, and spent a lot of time, contemplative time in nature in the woods. I don't think we're out of the woods yet. Even when we're here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so with that, kind of branching into different styles of poetry. There's a style called eco poetry, which
Okay.
is
Tell me about eco poetry.
which is sort of in line with like Thoreau and Emerson, like, oh, nature is so beautiful.
Yeah.
Trees, water, which I love. But then eco poetry kind of balances that out with an environmentalist side of like, yeah, nature is amazing, but we're also affecting it very greatly just with our human behavior and kind of
Yeah.
balancing that out. So I wouldn't say that I write eco poetry, but definitely starting to sway in that direction just with my day job and sustainability. You hear a lot about what's going on with waste and water and our resources, and it takes an effect on you, right? Especially when you start to write and think about nature.
As you're referencing those older poets, in my mind, I'm kind of like juxtaposing where we are in the like climate movement, the eco-conscious movement, versus where they were in kind of like the like industrialist period, I think. And in my mind, like nature is really all they really knew up until that heavy industrial revolution, that era. And so it's almost like a rediscovery in those older the Keats-like poems or what have you. And now I feel as though, like I'm personally, I think I told you this before, I'm very close to just embracing like environmental like sabotage or whatever. like pump the brakes, we're doing it all wrong. And I think that's kind of where we are in this moment, where it's like, we are close to losing a lot of the wonderful nature and the beauty that's described in these old poems. They're not even that old.
Right, not at all.
It hasn't been that long. And so I am hesitant to say that you are that different from those poets. You're just in a different context. You're in a different time period.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, I don't know. I don't think until like the 50s, maybe poetry used humor a lot. Maybe that's a blanket statement, but and so with the earlier poets on nature, it was very serious and beautiful, and where now I think humor is a bigger tool in contemporary poetry, and so that's one I lean on a lot, at least, and I think that definitely is contributing to the change you're talking about of how used to be like, oh, we're trying to industrialize and advance and, cut down trees to build houses and still have to do that. But now everyone, with all the technology we have, everyone's like, oh, let's go hang out by a lake and for a little bit and try to unplug, and maybe that'll give us some answers. So great things begin in March. Yes. I'll hold the book up again. Great things begin in March. Very professional book, staple it myself.
Oh, authentic. Why a book? Because, poetry is accessible once you kind of get the hang of it. I, myself, have written a dirty limerick or two. Heck yeah. And I would not put them in a book. Don't sell yourself short. It's not the place. Yeah. It's not the place for my poetry, I would say. And so, how did this book come about? Yeah, to be honest, it kind of started out as a joke. Oh, there you go. And great things begin in March. It's a play on the month of March and also starting in you're marching, you're starting something, and March is a very special month for me. My brother and I share the same birthday at the end of March. And Are you twins? No, we're 2 years apart, actually, which is just really weird, right? Gotcha. Same birthday. It's very consistent. Yeah, yep. And, we can talk about that later. Okay. No, but, March became a very kind of special time for our family growing up. And then being in Minnesota in March is always a very... whirlwind time of like spring's coming, you're still getting weird snowstorms, maple syrup starting to flow, and things are changing, right? And so kind of started to really think about that and believe that, and then I'd have arguments with my friends of like, March is the best month, and it'd be like this classic sign of like, prove me wrong. Okay, kind of thing. Sure. And I'd be like, well, we got March Madness, we got St. Patty's Day, and like all that kind of stuff. And like, what does February have that March doesn't?
And so,
Lots to talk about in your friend group. Okay.
yeah, very sophisticated conversation.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I really started thinking about that, and kind of became a somewhat theme for me of why am I not starting something more with writing. You know, I have a bunch of poems just sitting around Google Drive or something, and notebooks. Why not start seeing if we can compile some together, and started learning more about, poetry books and how people get started doing that, and this term chapbook comes up.
Yeah.
And I guess first chapbook, and great things begin in March.
And this is the style that fits your writing, because there are obviously different ways to distribute poetry. I see the occasional bit of poetry, almost like a snippet of poetry on Instagram, let's say, and it can only be like 5 lines. It has to be in that little box. And this book does not have any of those little snips, but they're also not very long.
Right.
They're very, again, accessible in terms of length. And so they are the kind of poems that you want to sit and really think on. Have a cup of coffee with them if you want. And
Exactly.
I think that there are these like distractions that come along with reading on your phone or reading on the computer.
Yes.
And your poems kind of invite you, or invited me, let's say, to put all of that away.
Right.
Probably go out in nature, really, and like
Leaning against a tree.
and hold on to something that we're losing. But they don't do that with like urgency. They're not. It's not like ringing alarm bells. It's almost more of a sense of nostalgia. And so I'm hoping we can get you to read one of them.
Yeah, of course.
It's Asking for a Water Cup.
Yeah.
And I don't know what page it's on, so you're gonna have to do that part.
Everybody turn the page. Yeah, great choice, especially for our sustainability talk. So, all right, let's jump into it.
Do it. Oh, this is our first reading on Bottomless Coffee. It's momentous.
Thank you.
No pressure.
Glad to be here. This is Asking for a Water Cup. Asking for a water cup in pouring high sea. I felt so guilty, ducking behind the raised booth, clicking the water dispenser tongue to divert attention and break suspense. Diving into the orange high sea flow with a burglar rush of adrenaline and sugar. The water cups were small, so I gulped 2 or 3, standing there while oblivious greed filled to the brim. Walking suave to a sticky circle booth, all our water cups radiated orange like a blinking UFO. Staring down at all the plastic and waste from barbecue sauce and chicken sandwiches. It started spinning because we ate so much. But it chose to fly out the window in that snowed-in small town, traveling in time to watch me again. Again in a circle now with my grandchildren, explaining to them that this dirty, rationed water that their parents can barely afford used to be clean and plentiful. Tasted fine too. And I used to pretend to get it for free so I could instead have something sugary.
Still profound. There's such a sense of nostalgia in 2 ways, at least, in that poem. One, as a child, obviously, is kind of a flashback, but then you go forward and you're thinking back on the present, when, we do have plentiful access to clean water.
Yeah.
And yet...
It's a privilege, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's something that, thinking back on it, I laugh a lot about how we used to do that as kids, of get a water cup and get soda. And now I really don't drink soda too much, so I'll try and reverse some of that. I'll order a soda cup and get water, maybe that
Really?
balances out some way.
I think you should probably stick to the tap and you'll be fine.
But just thinking about how interesting that is, and hopefully it's never the case that we have to, struggle
Well, we know
hard for
that's
fresh water. But
no. I regret to inform you that there are already like places like Flint, Michigan, like
Exactly.
Jackson, Mississippi, where water
Yep.
is just not available to
Right.
like huge numbers of people.
Yeah.
But we are, through marketing or through connivery or what have
Yeah.
you, we are so tempted by this other stuff that we really don't need, that we really like begin to lose our appreciation
Right.
for like one of the basic building blocks of life.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, totally agree. And I was trying to sit with that bias of myself of growing up next to the largest freshwater body in the world, Lake Superior, and just taking that for granted and thinking about the cycle of, what we look at now versus what we'll look at later when still water is water. It's makes so much of us. And so I really like to sit in that moment.
So that poem, is that the kind of poem that takes like 3 years to write? Or is it like, 2 beers and a pen and you're like, no problem?
More so the latter. Yeah,
Okay.
thinking about, I think my best and most creative portion of myself comes when I'm kind of goofing around, being a little silly.
Okay.
And so that's kind of where that came from. I'm just thinking about doing that as a kid. Like, man, that was stupid. But it's interesting and funny now. Let's expand on that. Like, let's
Yeah.
So that sense of nostalgia that you mentioned, I think, is very, very strong in a lot of that. So
And there's another one I'd love for you to read too.
great. Yeah.
We will get to the funny ones. He has funny ones. We'll do the funny ones in the next
funny,
segment.
I swear.
He was very insistent that we also include those. But I do want you to read 52 Pickup,
Oh, yeah.
which is one that's very close to my heart, which is fascinating since I think it's about your family. So,
All right. Back into it. 52 Pickup. The one-stall tan garage holds red pine needles on crumbling shingles, gray and speckled, falling along the triangular slant to rest inside the hollow bed of Grandpa's 52 pickup. A collector now and looks the part, red and white with a distinct smile, each corner polished by laughing clothes running circles to catch one another's heart. The leafy descent of autumn and health. From a window, Grandpa watches while playing cards on the sturdy kitchen table without a leaf. Fingers growing weak, mind asleep, don't bother shuffling but to the bathroom, when all the cards fall and rest, like the shingles, like the cards, the 52 pickup that won't ever start. Thank you.
I feel like you have to spend so much time thinking about a person to be able to capture just like a little bit of their essence, even their morning, their shuffling or not shuffling cards.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. Thank
you.
Were you ever able to show that to your grandfather?
No, passed away, unfortunately. So with that, and it's kind of an accumulation of a few of my grandparents kind of thrown into one, which is also like to weave that into the 52 pickup, right? Like the funny game you play as a kid, playing a joke on your friends versus the actual
super funny.
truck. Yeah, really
Everyone
funny.
loves it.
Yeah, love that game. And just thinking about the motion of that and like the cards falling and things
and the shingles
decomposing
and the leaves.
and just overall aging, and how the seasons change and thinking about that is beautiful thought to me, and hope it came across, and in that short amount of words.
Very much so. It's almost like time slows down a little bit.
Yeah.
When we kind of take a step back and we really think about life, and even just a moment or two of life, and why the 52 pickup? Why the Is there actually a truck?
They don't have one, but I was assuming, at some point there was a 52 pickup.
Yeah.
It probably looked like, the classic old.
You're like, my grandfather's like a truck.
Yeah. Right. And then thinking about it, probably doesn't, most of them probably don't work now, and sitting in the garage somewhere, and moving back towards nature. Like
my husband's grandfather is a 68 Mustang.
Nice.
Over Thanksgiving, they set and they queued up YouTube videos about these Mustangs, and I was like, I had no idea there were just like channels devoted to it.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have known that either. That's fun.
He loved it.
You get to ride in it, or?
Oh no. But at some point,
Can't even look at it.
If there ever comes to be like a poem that tries to capture the essence of that person and relate it to like a vehicle or to something, I'm like, okay, he likes fast cars. He likes sporty vibes or what have you. Whereas I'm getting very thoughtful and deliberate, but also maybe a little playful vibes.
Definitely. I try and keep the playful in there, but one of my favorite things about poetry is kind of trying to connect those familiar things to maybe more unfamiliar things, and how those connections are everywhere and nowhere all the time. Just trying to make those.
And I know that's a little bit of your process, but I think we're going to get into right after this coffee break. Stick with us. There will be funny poems coming from Joey Gotchnik, author of Great Things Begin in March.
I don't like spinning.
Working out? It's hard when your schedule's as busy as mine.
Cooking is not my thing. It's boring. Nope.
Disgusting.
I knew I needed to make a change.
I knew we needed to make a change.
I knew I needed to make a change.
You know how I got healthier? Not cooking.
I switched up my order and I walked to and from the restaurant.
In the morning, I get my work done. At night, I put my work in.
We still don't like eating vegetables. But it turns out we kind of like drinking them.
Improve your heart health to your own beat. LiveToTheBeat.org.
I am a mother of 3. I'm from Puerto Rico, but been in the Midwest since 1994. I have 3 beautiful children, one a 20-year-old trying to figure out adulthood. Then I have a 14-and-a-half-year-old in Northeast Middle School. And my little one got drilled of how important it is to keep everybody safe. I suffer from type 2 diabetes, hypothyroidism, so my immune system is compromised, and I'm overweight, as you can tell. So my little daughter started telling me, Mommy, please get the vaccination. I don't want you to die. You need to go to my graduation. You need to do this. And I told her, Shkare, I'm going to do this for my kids. I really, at that point, to be honest with you, I was like, but I thought to myself, okay, I need to do this because all the reports and all the symptoms people are dying from, I don't want to be there. So when I got my vaccine, I was a little hesitant, but I noticed the next 3, I didn't get sick at all, no symptoms like other people have experienced. My husband said, well, I don't see any horns or any tails coming up. I guess it's safe for me to have the vaccination. She even told me one day, Mom, you realize we're part of history? I was like, oh yeah. He says, who knows? My name might be one of those history books. I'm like, oh my God, where do you come from?
Healthcare isn't just about who treats you, who pays for it, or the innovation that makes it all work. It's about being a partner for all of it, for all of us. A partner for good.
Open up the door, 'cause I'm feeling glorious. Yeah, I'm about to win, I'm about to win. Oh, I'm gonna light this down. Oh, you're gonna see me now, 'cause I'm feeling glorious.
Okay, we are back with Joey Gotchnik, author of Great Things Begin in March. And if you want a copy of the book, you do need to reach out to him. His email is jgotchv. That's jgotchvi@gmail.com. Now, okay, let's talk process.
Love it.
Whoa. I don't think every poet has the same one. I think, was it like Hemingway who was in Key West, like just getting drunk all the time? I think you mentioned that one of your poems was
Altered
like
states of mind. Yeah.
very quickly written, maybe with the beer, maybe not. So what's your, like on a standard day, like what's the process for writing?
Yeah, I mean, it changes, evolves. I think what I've gotten into a good habit of lately is if I experience a thought or a moment that I think is interesting, I'll just write it down on my phone or in the notebook.
Yeah.
Just like a line, like driving to work behind a hearse or something like that.
Okay.
You know, that's a weird example. It just came up, I guess. And then later I'll, when I'm feeling kind of silly, goofy, like we talked about before, I'll kind of scroll through those and start with that line I've written down and just be like, all right, let's write one more line. And then if that starts going somewhere, we roll with it and go with the flow. And we'll usually let it sit for a day and come back to it and be like, is this something I want to keep working through? And I'll write it maybe a few more times handwritten. And then if I really am liking where it's going, I'll transfer it to the digital world. And that's kind of a sort of editing process in itself to like read it and keep writing it multiple times, and so on and so forth. I feel like you got a question there.
Yeah. I'm hearing a process in 3 parts.
Yeah.
First, it sounds like you draw inspiration from a particular moment. You're like, oh, I'm riding behind a hearse.
Yep.
Oh, that's interesting. Or, oh, that cloud looks like, I don't know, a bunny rabbit or something, But then you write it down. Mm-hmm. And this is something I chide my husband on all the time because we go back and forth with ideas. And I'm like, just write it down. How are you going to remember it if you don't write it down?
Can't.
And I really do feel like that's crucial. Mm. And you have like the Notepad app with you or what have you.
Yep.
I enjoy photography.
Nice.
And, there's a saying that the best camera is the camera that you have with you.
Yes, you're right.
So I've got a big, like, hunky DSLR that I never bring out, right?
Yeah.
But I've got my cell with me all the time.
Right.
And they're like, you can double tap the power button and the camera pops right up. And I'm like always ready for the moment because the moment leaves you really quickly if you don't capture it.
Yes.
And so I think that first part that I was hearing was the ability just to like capture a little bit of that feeling, that serendipitous moment when you're, you see a fun snowman as you're driving by or the leaves or the branches in the trees are shaking in just the right way.
Right.
Then you write it down. But then it sounds like you come back to it at some point when you're in a mood to write.
Yes.
And I couldn't tell because you were referencing something silly at the time, but we haven't read any silly poems yet. So is it like, do you have like a dedicated writing time? And then it's like, okay, I'm feeling a little silly. What in here looks silly? Or is it like I'm going to write today and I'm going to like go through my list and see what vibes?
Yeah. I tend to write either early in the morning or late at night. And as far as picking what I want to write about, and when I mean silly, I don't always mean, humorous, so just kind of playful, I guess maybe is a better word. And I like to come back to those thoughts I've written down because usually I'll write it down and then write like parentheses like what I think is happening in this moment because I think that's my favorite part is going back to it and expanding on it and realizing there's multiple different ways to go there. Like if somebody says something interesting to you like in passing, you're like, what did that mean? And then building a whole situation around that quote is kind of a style I emulate, even if it's not a quote, if it's just a particular cup of coffee on the table or something like that. And definitely try and keep things fresh, and variety is very important of just taking as much random objects and settings as possible to keep the ideas flowing, because that's when the best, I think, content comes out, when you're just consistently going, which is hard, right? Motivation can be such a roller coaster. Yeah.
I would say, so we are definitely wanting to keep things accessible. And like one of the big reasons I wanted to do this episode is because poetry is a way that some people heal. Just through being able to express their feelings through poetry.
Yep.
And so, everyone can write down the thought in the moment, We're all busy, we all have a lot going on, but you just write it down, come back to it when you want it, when you've got your headspace, your mind, your spirit in the right place, so like really work through whatever it is you feel like you need to work through.
Yes.
And then if you're gonna publish it, like this is an active publication, do edit. And it sounds like there is a pretty extensive editing process.
Yes.
For you.
Yes. Yeah, I think,
like you wrote it down several times, you said, then it goes to the computer, and then it changes again.
Yeah, it's definitely not the, lavish part of writing, editing, but it is definitely the most important, probably.
Yeah.
I guess starting is the most important, but
that's true.
But as editing, it just takes kind of the most discipline and to really pick and choose and wean out what you think is not important and whatnot, and that's different for everybody. But as far as being accessible, I don't think right away you need to be too hard on yourself in editing, or have some sort of image of it being up on a big screen.
Agreed.
It can be just for yourself, and that's, I think, some of the most powerful stuff is when you write it with the intention of not showing it to anybody. Then all of a sudden you're like, wow, this is pretty meaningful, and then a lot of people can access that too, to maybe your surprise. Which I've found surprised a lot, because it's hard to share some intimate thoughts in writing, right?
We had a hospice chaplain on the show who was lots of quotes. He was dropping lots of quotes in that chair right there.
Wow.
And I think there was even some poetry, but we were talking about COVID in particular. We talked about COVID a lot on the show. We're sponsored by the Minnesota Department of Health.
Yeah.
Get boosted if you're not boosted, everybody. And you do have a funny story around that, and we'll see if we talk about that or not. But like there are a lot of people who need to heal. And I don't care how you heal. As long as you acknowledge the fact that all of us, especially in the Minneapolis area, have experienced trauma, and we need to get to the point where we are working through it and resolving it in the best way that we can. And so poetry is definitely one way, but even if you set out intending to write something serious, you might still get something funny like the Snowplow, which I would love for you to read next. If you don't mind.
Right now.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Now's your time.
Yeah, we're getting into that winter time period, so everybody get your snowplow names out. So, this is the snowplow. Did you know they name snowplows like pets or movies every winter? Betty Whiteout and Edward Blizzardhands storm in unison down Highway 35. A tidal wave of snow, the banks are full, de-icer glitters behind a spin dial. Scoop Dog and Plow Bunyan take to the suburbs now, with nothing else to do but misbehave. A casual side mirror plinked off, and a mailbox, too, stood no chance, as it somersaulted over the snowbank to land on the front porch, chewed up, battered, and spit out. But the mailman is late, anyways, pushed along by Snowy-Wan Kenobi in one of those infinite and endless man-made waves.
Thank you. I was trying not. It's like, let the man read.
I'm glad you think it's funny, because I think it's somewhat a little bit funny, at least.
Yes. I will say my favorite snowplow was Plowy McPlowface.
Yeah, that is a great one. There are just so many funny ones out there. People are so creative.
Were you personally victimized by a snowplow, or how did that one come about? What was the note?
No, but I've seen it many times, with the Minneapolis snow emergencies and people not moving their cars, and I've seen a few. side mirrors get
Yeah. Oh,
blinked off. And they're just like, man, it's kind of have a mind of their own sometimes, but you don't blame them. It's a tough job having to clear all the streets out. And
Agreed. And there are these all of us here have experienced being blocked in our driveways or whatever by
huge wave comes by.
And I think typically we just complain about it,
right?
But there's something much more beautiful about taking this experience that we all have and just giving us all a chance to laugh about it.
Right. And just personifying an inanimate snowplow is just
absolutely
hilarious. I think
that's healing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So it's about that time, so everyone get ready to look differently at those snowplows this year.
And I feel like humor is important to you in poetry, and so I cannot write a joke to save my life. Like in a moment, in a conversation, I'm like, yeah, put the cameras on. We'll find the joke, and then we'll write that down. You know what I mean? We'll find a way to make that funny. Mm-hmm. But like the setup and the punchline and finding the rhythm, and there is a rhythm to the snowplow that I think helps the humor. That in the same way that there is a rhythm to 52 card pickup that helps with the quiet contemplation of life, let's say. So was that on purpose, or is that the songwriting that's coming in?
Definitely try and have a nice flow to it, and thinking about the whole time of like a snowplow, the way that the snow curls around like a wave and kind of keeps going and rests and keeps going and rests.
Yeah.
And so, the silence in poetry I think is very important to me, is to be contemplative, and that's one thing I find so beautiful about poetry is, the breaks between stanzas and at the end of the poem when you finish, like how much silence is there after you read it, and how it's like just your mind turning over like a snowplow wave. And
yeah, I think that might actually be a sign of good poetry.
Yeah.
Because there are definitely poems I'm like, nah, junk.
Next page.
So you have another great poem I want you to read. But first I want to ask about your influences in poetry. Because I think we talked about some older poets. Oh, and I'm going to put that in quotes now, because I feel like it's not that old. Yeah. In the grand scheme of things. Who you referenced, but didn't necessarily like want to be like. You're like, I'm influenced in that I don't want to be like you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you been influenced positively by any poets that you'd like to speak on?
Definitely a lot of poets. I think most recently and probably closest to my poems in this book is Billy Collins. He's a wonderful poet, very funny.
Very funny.
Kind of the master of like the turn or the twist, where he takes a very accessible situation, like two people chatting over coffee, and then all of a sudden you're somewhere else, and it's humorous but also very meaningful with the punchline at the end, and it's reads a little more like prose, very accessible, and I think that's a style I've been recently diving into, as well as I mentioned eco poetry. I think it's Craig Santos Perez, University of Hawaii professor, is kind of big on the eco poetry. He has a lot of wonderful poems. I'm thinking about this one he wrote about his daughter having a fever and relating that to global warming and Earth having a fever, and really beautiful. Yeah. And so, and of course, like the classics, Sylvia Plath and Robert Frost, as far as reading them and understanding how they, rhyme and flow is definitely good to always have in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
But definitely lean more on the free verse style versus too rigid of structure, which you need some structure here and there to keep you balanced. But
for sure.
Yeah, for the moment, those are probably my biggest influences, as well as songwriting. John Prine and Jackson Browne really influenced me a lot on the writing side.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice. Yeah. I am thinking about Billy Collins, and that's the artist I'm most familiar with that you referenced. And he is funny, but he's not laughing at people.
Right.
And that's a mistake I made a couple of years ago during COVID, pre-vaccine. We were all just keeping together digitally by group message. It was kind of annoying. They were like a bunch of Apple users, and they were like, "You have to get in this group chat." So I had to use my computer because I'm an Android user. Use my computer to go on iMessage or what have you. But that gave me like a little bit more freedom, and when I was expressing my thoughts to them, like I could have some long text if I wanted to. And
you can.
At some point, we started doing limericks, right?
Nice.
But then we were a bunch of shady gays, and so they were like hard reads on people, you know. and so it was like less of a ha 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 ha. Aren't snowplows the worst, and more like ha ha ha. That was really mean, Jerome. And I think, like anything, we have to be at least somewhat conscious of how we're using it and the message that we're expressing, because, like, tweets last for, like, no time at all, right? But if you take time and intention behind your words, your prose, or your poetry, then you do want to make sure you're not harming someone. But then also, I can't think of a piece of poetry that is like a shady read or what have you on someone. Like, the good stuff is good stuff, you know?
Right.
And the bad stuff gets left behind. So that was just a thought that I had. You tugged on a memory.
Right, that is interesting, and definitely, something you gotta navigate. You know, we all have crazy thoughts sometimes, and I think I try and lean on like more of the, oh, did you notice this in my experience? And kind of the like Seinfeld, really clean humor style of,
that's for the best.
I think, and that's personally what I find the funniest is like, oh, that, you know, person said something funny to me. What's going on here?
And you can come back to it. You know, I'm like, it's still funny. It's still funny. Like, my stuff is terrible. I do want. Well, you don't know. I grew from it, and so now you're like, oh, couldn't possibly, Joe. I assure you. We do have one more poem that I want you to read. At least before we go to break. It's called "Grooming."
Oh yeah.
And you had this marked under funny. I had it marked under flirty. And so let's just
it's a
see.
gray area.
We'll let the audience decide.
Yeah. I'm glad you chose this one. I love this one. All right, this is grooming. The cat is licking herself again. Pink belly completely stripped of fur and afraid of each stomp in the apartment above. I hope they're not licking themselves too, clomping around in frustration, the treasure trail that just won't budge. Ever heard of a razor blade? They make electric ones as well. But I don't mean to ruin the fun, using your tongue. It seems silly now to groom as much as we groom. The social pressure, I ought to bet, pushed the cave dwellers to beautifully oiled and matted hair until one dwelt it decided a smooth back was desirable. The insecurity blew the caves into today where a nose hair or belly fur costs a reputation. That is, until hairy hands come back. The escalation, though, is not completely clear if the pressure started with the cats up there or the cats right here.
Nice.
Thank you.
Yes. And I read that and I was like, okay, Joey.
Right. It flirts the line, I guess. Yeah.
It does, but it also talks about body image and insecurity. And those are certainly prevalent issues in my community, the gay community.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh yeah, why are people worrying about hair on their shoulders? Why? Like, who thinks that I care about how many hairs you have on your big toe? Like, I cannot care. And yet, if I'm going through social media or if I'm watching commercials, there's almost always something about coloring your hair or shaving or trimming or whatever. And it's just, there's something liberating about the recognition that all of this is dumb.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally on board and love the expression of whatever you choose. But as far as, you know, what's the reasoning behind it, you know, and we could do a whole episode on social media influence, right? And so just thinking about, why do we do that. And moving back in time yet again, like the time travel, thinking about, cavemen and women. And
like, when did this
did
start?
they think about that? Like what were they doing? And
wow.
Yeah.
I did time this specifically to make sure we didn't dwell too long and get ourselves into trouble. So, well, let's have a coffee break.
Perfect.
And we'll be right back.
Bueno, pues mi nombre es Miguel Jaime, me dicen el Corre, trabajo para la raza 95.7 1400. Las cosas que me motivó o que me hizo pensar el realmente ponerme la vacuna fue el ver mucha gente cómo estaba en los hospitales, cómo los hospitales fueron subiendo con gente contagiada, infectada y sobre todo mucha gente que estaba, pues en su momento, cuando estaba la pandemia fuerte, muriendo. Incluso tomé la decisión, tanto por mí, sobre todo por mi familia, porque no quería, y lo estuve viendo también por parte de mi familia, que tuve familiares que desafortunadamente con esto de la pandemia perdí, y fue cuando entonces pensé y dije, no, pues realmente hay que vacunarnos por el bien de nosotros, el bien de nuestras familias y nuestros hijos.
Not everyone with COVID-19 will make a fast or full recovery. Some people develop long COVID, symptoms like shortness of breath, extreme tiredness, headaches, dizziness, or other issues that happen for months or years after their COVID-19 infection. Even mild COVID-19 can lead to long COVID. We are still learning about long COVID, but care and support may be available. Find resources for patients, caregivers, healthcare providers, employers, and more at our website.
The COVID-19 Pfizer vaccine is now available to children 5 to 11 years old. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommends children who are able get vaccinated. Even children can get COVID-19, and the vaccine helps provide protection to keep children healthy. COVID-19 vaccine is safe, free, and effective for children. The Pfizer vaccine for children aged 5 to 11 is a smaller dose of vaccine than the Pfizer vaccine for people aged 12 and older. The smaller dose is packaged differently, so you will want to go to a vaccine location that has this vaccine. COVID-19 vaccine does not cause illness. COVID-19 vaccine protects families from COVID-19. Your child will need 2 doses of COVID-19 vaccine to be fully protected. Wait 3 weeks between getting the first and second dose. Your child is fully protected 2 weeks after the second dose. Talk to a healthcare provider if you have any questions. And the MDH hotline is also available at 1-833-431-2053.
You are watching Bottomless Coffee with Jerome, and we are talking poetry with Joey Gotchnik. Now, if you want to get a copy of Joey's chapbook, you're going to send an email to jgotchvi, that's jgotchvi @gmail.com. So there was one more poem that's a bit more serious that I'm hoping that you'll read for us out of Great Things Begin in March, and it's called Treewell.
Of course, yes. Let's get into it. All right, this is Treewell. A bluebird day in the evergreens, the pine, cedar, spruce, fir, scaly and coarse and beautiful. The snow, the typical form of water to cause wonder, floating with each flake as it lands on the strong pine. The evergreen with the comfort blanket, heavy, heavier with each snowfall. Needles pierce snowflakes to hold the future until branches flex, bend downward, slowly on the brink, and spring back up. A coordinated shiver and slide shed extra weight in a perfect ring around the largest diameter of swing dance. And the snow wants so badly to reach the trunk, the base where it's safe. But the pine sheds it like the cold air in a cedar sauna. Over time, the snow congregates and encircles the pine as snow does around sturdy statues, driveways, and windows. Easier, though, around the trees that stay rooted in the community they built. No wishes fall to the wintry pine base, only reckless skiers, animal shelters, and dried needles. A tree hibernation made possible from gifted skies, and the pine gives back oxygen, and we give back Christmas. Happy still, the source of life, their base is guarded in a tree well, to be well and hunker down with a blanket, until the snow turns to rain, and the rain doesn't breathe like snow.
I feel like you really love trees.
Love trees.
You love trees. It's like, I'm like, this is a love poem to
Yes,
a tree.
yes, and it's really based on, I love skiing. Skiing is probably one of my favorite things to do, and it's a real like danger and hazard in the mountains of these Treewells that are just an empty space where the snow builds up around, where skiers can get caught in them, and yeah, it's like very advertised of beware of these Treewells.
Yeah.
And you know, as we talked about before, that thought of like beware of a Treewell, and then thinking about, well, what's going on there with the trees? What do the trees think about these?
Yeah.
And
what's the snow's motivation?
Yeah,
here?
thinking about it's kind of like a little home they're building, throughout the winter and so on and so forth. Yeah.
I'm like, go ski somewhere else. Leave the Treewells alone.
right. Yeah, exactly. And just that, idea of the changing seasons and how great things begin in March.
So, in your work in sustainability, do you, like, without speaking exactly to what that work is, how are you incorporating like your thoughts about nature, like, into your work? Is it radical? Is it technical? Is it precise? Is it refining what can be done? And do you find yourself kind of balancing your brain? Is it like, oh, this was a poetic solution to a complex technical problem?
Yeah. I think it's maybe closer to technical, being I think about that for 45 hours a week, and but as far as being immersed in nature and like this poem here, just thinking about how we can be better neighbors, kind of to the natural world, and you do your parts and everything adds up, but at the same time, the business and corporation side of my day job can be more technical about how do we reduce waste and not have to use too much more resources every day. And
now that's interesting. I'm going to challenge you on the statement that we need to be better neighbors, because we are definitely all part of the same natural world.
Right. Right.
I don't know, maybe we just don't be a bad part of the natural world.
Yeah, exactly. Leave no trace principles are wonderful, and that sort of thing where it just experience it as it was, right? Can't imagine how many times we've gone on a hike or something, right? And you see a Gatorade bottle or something laying there, and you're like, come on, we don't need to do that. And
we don't.
Yeah.
I agree. I would say we also do need to spend more time, like, in thought and in contemplation, and that's really what I pulled from that poem. It's like, sit, like, stay still for some time. Like, you were staying still. The trees are staying still. The snow is falling. It's building around. Like, things still happen when you are still, and those things can be very beautiful.
Yes.
And I love that.
Yeah, just thinking about, the snow is a beautiful thing in its own, but it can be a burden on the tree, right? And how the tree manages that is very interesting. And I agree. It's kind of an ode to the evergreens.
Yeah.
In a way.
That's one of your favorites in the book, right?
Yes. Yeah, I do love that one. It really puts me in that skiing mentality too, of skiing through the trees and stopping and just really immersing myself in a few moments of silence and appreciating what's going on there. And
Oh, that's nice. So I'm not a good skier. I tried to snowboard once, and I was like, oh, no, okay. And I kind of waddled myself over to the lodge and just like sat down.
Yeah.
But I am tempted by the idea of boarding or skiing out and stopping to appreciate a scene I might not otherwise have access to.
Bingo.
I do love that.
Yeah, it's definitely a treat.
Oh. Well, I hate that our time together is coming to an end.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you the question that I ask all of my guests. Is there a message that you want to make sure that our audience can take away from our conversation today?
Yes, great question.
Thank you.
I want to first say the one thing again about poetry that really draws me in is this idea of time. And everyone's always talking about time, right? I don't have enough time. What time is it? You having a good time? You having a bad time? And when that shows up in a lot of poetry, right? That with existentialism and whatnot, and it can become really heavy on your shoulders really quick when you start thinking about time and what do I need to do, what do I want to do, and so I think my biggest message and takeaway is kind of aligned with my book title of like starting is the hardest part, but it's also the most important part for positive change and growth and I think being playful in that moment is one of the best things you can do, because even if it's frustrating and you're mad and you're starting, and you can realize that and you can look back on that a week later, a month later, and really appreciate where you've gone, where, you know, when you first start, you're like, oh, I'm going to get to that point, and really you're over here, and you're like, never would have expected that, and that is such a beautiful thing. So, you know, the balance of pushing yourself to start without being too hard on yourself, I think is the big message I want to have take away.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
One exercise that I learned about through the podcast is very similar, and it's, you know, stay still and think about yourself in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Again, an exercise relating to time.
Yeah.
And imagine having a conversation with yourself and ask yourself, how did you get here?
Right.
But a nuance is, if you keep doing the things that you're doing now, if you just stay doing what you're doing, what's that conversation like? Versus if you do all of the things that you say you want to start doing, then what is the conversation like down the road? And how much more satisfying would that be?
Yeah, it's really easy to do nothing. Right?
So easy.
So easy. Yeah. But yeah, that's a really good point. So.
Well, this has been so great.
This
Thank
has been
you
fantastic.
so much. I hope.
Thank you for having me.
If we have a season 2, I hope you'll come back. I hope there'll be new
anytime.
poems.
Yeah, yeah. Great things begin in June.
March. Don't mess up your brand. Thank you. I'm Jerome Evans. This has been Bottomless Coffee with Jerome. Find out all about us at bottomlesscoffeeshow.com, and I'll make sure I put a link up to Joey's email address there so that you can get in touch.